Right, thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here. It's a brilliant conference, and the other really brilliant thing for me as a futurist is I usually have to spend a lot of time trying to get people to think about the future at all. And here we've got this brilliant pre-selected audience of people who are proactively interested in the future. So I'm really delighted about that. It's pretty unusual. Just to explain, what I do is I'm a business futurist. So I go into businesses and help them consider the future that they're facing and work out a strategy based on that of how they can grow or at least remain alive in the future. And what I want to do today is to, first of all, consider how businesses do that, particularly focusing on a technique called scenario planning, and then consider how can we take lessons from this and apply it to our personal life. Because what you're seeing here, these amazing futures being conjured up, the question is, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to plan for your individual life? Because in some ways, that is the most important thing. So we have all these amazing futures being described for us. And the visceral response that you have to them, I suspect that some of you see them as really quite positive, that kind of picture on the top there. The future is rosy, it's bright, that technology may sort out a lot of the problems that we have. Technology is the panacea. But some of what we've seen, fairly black sky stuff I might suggest, is a much more negative, apocalyptic version of the future. And there might be almost a sense of relief that actuarial escape velocity notwithstanding, the chances are most people in this room won't be around to see some of those really far distant futures. But what is sure about all of this is we're not sure how it's going to go. There is uncertainty. So if I was coming and doing this talk 5 years ago or even 2 years ago, I might be coming here and saying how fabulous was the future, was the prospect for companies like Nokia and BlackBerry and Apple, and now we're pretty much writing their epitaphs. Maybe not quite for Apple, but maybe I'm a bit premature on that one. But there is a lot of disruption, and businesses have to deal with this disruption, and they have to plan, because one thing that businesses have to do is plan for the future. They have shareholders clamoring for results, clamoring for positive indications of future growth, of increase in the share price. And so they have to be able to come up with a business plan in the face of huge uncertainty, just like we do, just as we do as individuals. And one of the techniques, I didn't forward the slide, here we are. One of the techniques that businesses use very effectively is something called scenario planning. I'm just wondering, has anybody had a go at doing scenario planning at work? Or a few hands, okay, that's great. And all scenario planning really is at its heart is a very simple idea that we accept that we don't know where the future's going. We know it's being disrupted. And so rather than desperately trying to predict and come up with as sure a version as possible for how the future will end up, we accept that uncertainty and say, right, what are the most likely scenarios to emerge and what can we do about them? Now, the pioneer of scenario planning, and something which I think helps us understand where it's got to today, the giant of it all, was this man. I don't know if anybody recognizes him, who's somebody called Herman Kahn, and he was truly a giant, apparently 7 foot tall, although nobody's exactly sure how tall he was, and apparently he had the shape of a prize-winning pear, not my words, by the way. And he's a really interesting character. He was working for the Rand Corporation in the 1950s in the States, which was a kind of defense think tank. And he completely changed, him and his group, who were known as the Megadeth intellectuals, they changed how people understood military strategy and the way that people could consider the future by forcing people to think the unthinkable. He wrote a book in 1960 called On Thermonuclear War. And what he did that was so different was, rather than seeing thermonuclear war as the endpoint of everything, he posited the suggestion that maybe we should consider what the world would look like afterwards. And he really broke apart the way people thought about the future. And it's quite an unnatural way for us to think. It takes us into very uncomfortable territory, which is something that we can borrow for business and from scenario planning for ourselves. And he was a very funny character. He had this idea that humor was the best way to really bring a point across. And I don't know if any of you have seen the Stanley Kubrick film, Dr. Strangelove, but apparently Kubrick was going to have this film which is about nuclear war. He was going to play it really straight. And then he met Herman Kahn and decided to turn it into a comedy, which it is. It's a brilliant, albeit pretty black, comedy. And some people really got the joke and were really moved to think differently, and other people thought it was just a really sick joke at the expense of the defense establishment. So the two things that Herman Kahn really did that we take, and which are the kind of the spirit of scenario planning, is number one, he accepted that there might be different scenarios, that different things might happen. And the second thing is, he accepted that any system, anything that we're trying to consider the future of, is complex. It will be impacted by different drivers. So rather than just focusing, in his case, on military strategy, he also considered the human issues and the moral issues. And whichever system we're trying to model the future of, be it the future of food stores or the future of geopolitics or the future of a single person, it's these two things that can really help us to build a better future-proofed plan, the complexity and the understanding that we're dealing with uncertainty. So if any of you have lived through a scenario planning process, probably at work, there's a kind of classic scenario planning grid that you end up with. It's a 2x2 matrix. All management consultants love 2x2 matrices, whatever you can put in them. But it's an incredibly powerful tool, potentially, to help people think about the future. There were some scenarios called the Montfleur scenarios, which are credited with hastening the end of apartheid in South Africa. And what's so powerful about them is not just that you end up with scenarios for how the world might go, and therefore you can expand your mind and consider a sensible strategy, but just doing the process, and you see this in businesses time after time, helps you unpack the assumptions people have, not just about the future, but how they think their sector works, their business works, their organization works. And very often, people make these grand assumptions, oh, we all understand what kind of business we're in, and it's not shared at all. And so it becomes a tool, if you like, to just unpack this. And similarly, when you apply it to your personal life, you can understand what really drives you. Where do you really think you're going? What do you really want to be? And one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about all of this is because companies are doing this kind of planning, and they may be planning you into their future, you as customers, you as consumers, but they're not doing it in your interest. And it seems to have a sort of elegant logic to it. If we could just take on board ourselves some of these tools and use them to plan our own futures, obviously very much in our own interest. So there's really three elements of the whole scenario planning process that I think we can take on board as individuals that can help us plan the future for ourselves. Uncertainty. The first one is just accepting uncertainty. And what tends to happen when we face uncertainty is we just turn away. It's so much easier not to have to worry about all of these different issues. And when it comes to business, that's just as true. There's a whole disruption industry. I am to some extent part of it, which means going into businesses and saying, the world is changing so dramatically, we don't know where things are going. You need to have an outside consultant come and help you sort it out. But the problem is when this message gets pushed too far, you end up with a kind of disruption paralysis. Things are changing so much, there's nothing we can do, let's just give up. And I think that it's actually from psychology, there's quite a sound principle called the locus of control, which is about the extent to which individuals understand they can or cannot control different things in the environment that's around them. So the important thing when it comes to thinking about the future and disruption is, one, understanding the continuities, but also understanding which of those things which you genuinely can't control and which are beyond your power, and which of those things which you can have some power to change, and making that boundary very, very clear, and working out where are indeed the key uncertainties, and also the ones which you can change how your future will go. I think that the difficult thing about accepting uncertainty is that there's an incredibly strong cultural and social drive towards confidence, and that means certainty. That if, especially an entrepreneur, you have to be striding out very, very certain of your business plan, of where it's going to go, and you cannot admit any doubt. And the interesting thing is when you talk to lots of entrepreneurs, especially the successful ones, this is the third or fourth time they're trying this out. We have to put on this veneer, but the uncertainty is there. So at the front of every single initial public offering for a new business that wants to list on the stock exchange, there's a risk section. You have to show that you have thought as a business about what the risks are. And the same should apply to us as individuals when we're thinking about the future. Another thing that is an important learning from scenario planning for us as individuals is this issue about objectivity. So in a business, we have to be rational. We have to be able to justify the decisions that we have made in some rational way, especially if they come back to bite us. And one of the ways that we can do that is to force some distance between us and whatever the question is. So businesses will often go off-site to try and get some perspective on what's going on in the business, what's going on in their sector. And the other thing you can do to try and get some perspective is to force out the time frame. Because if you go into a business and you're doing planning for the next 2 years, everybody in the room is thinking about their own territory, which office they're going to get, their promotion, are they going to get the same amount of budget next year? But if you start to look further out, you can almost paradoxically depersonalize it. It's not about the people in the room anymore. It's implicit but accepted that most of them won't be in that room in 10 years' time. And actually, it can really free people up to thinking more objectively and more rationally about the business. Now, of course, it's very difficult to think objectively about ourselves. Obviously, we are subjective in how we view ourselves. But we can find different ways to get some of that perspective, some of that distance, even if it's as easy as asking somebody else to go and take a view on what's going on in your life and whatever decision you're facing. And the other great thing, of course, is that if you are trying to tell somebody else about it, you have to condense it into the salient points. Otherwise, your friend, your audience will eventually just give up on you. And a really powerful thing about doing this kind of individual future planning is that it can be a good defense against regret. If something happens, if the outcome is not what you wanted, at least if you're able to say, I sat down and I thought about it, and based on the information that I had available, I made the best possible decision, that can be incredibly comforting and make you feel that you did do the right thing, albeit with not quite the outcome that you wanted. And the last thing of all is that it is a process. Thinking about your future, planning for your future, is not going to happen by itself. And it's something that you have to do for yourself. So when you go and do this future planning for different businesses, the kind of drivers that impact the sector, the way the business might respond is different. It's different for Coke and it's different for Pepsi. And in the same way as an individual, you can't borrow somebody else's life plan. There are going to be limits and idiosyncrasies in terms of what you can do and in terms of the things you can change. So that's all I wanted to say, and I hope this is the first chapter in a fabulous future for all of you. Thank you.